Alrighty. It is just about that time once again. Welcome to church. It is a brisk Sunday morning. We're still going further into our descent into fall. So, is this becoming like a weird weekly fixture of like Caleb as teacher talks about the weather? That's like the last thing we kind of feel before we come to church. So I guess that's just like a conversation starter. But I don't know. It's nice to be somewhere that actually has seasons. I feel like down south we have summer, a bit of wind, and then winter, and then a bit of wind, and then summer. So, but also, doesn't every state say that? Oh, it must be nice to have actual seasons where you're going back and forth. It's different, so we think it's a full season. So, yeah, yep, yeah. No, definitely. There's to actually, as we were talking about, to actually see snow is fun, but yeah, having that actual low temperature is very, very different. Whereas in Oklahoma, I feel like the main identifier of the different weather is the wind. Is how intense is the wind? In summer, you have like hair dryer wind. In spring, you have ridiculous cyclone wind that you can't hear or see barely anything because everything's being whipped around you. And in winter, it's wind chill. It might feel like 40 degrees, but that wind chill is legitimately dropping it down to like 15 degrees. And so we don't really have like fur coats or like heavy coats in Oklahoma. We have windbreakers. Because you can wear fur and heavy and all that stuff, but that wind is cutting right through it.
Oklahoma winter is worse than Wisconsin.
I agree.
Yeah, we don't get snow. We get like freezing rain, which just makes for ice overnight. So, we never get to see the nice fluffy snow, and we don't have a fleet of trucks that can clear it all off the next day. It's just, hey, let's make the high schoolers drive on a sheet of ice. That sounds fun. Anyway, there's our little weather diversion for our class this morning. So, going to the Bible, we are continuing our study of Isaiah. We just finished up looking at chapter 9 and the first two verses of chapter 10. A little fun, I guess not fun, but like fill in of the rest of chapter 10, because our study this morning, we're skipping right over to chapter 11. But the last section of chapter 10, if you remember, the beginning of chapter 10 is another woe. It's woe to those who make unjust laws, who make oppressive decrees that deprive the poor of their rights, withhold justice from the oppressed of my people. Isaiah in the rest of chapter 10 goes on to essentially warn those people that he gives woe to say, what are you going to do whenever the judgment happens? Like, what leg will you have to stand on? You will have nothing. He tells the unjust leaders that there is no hope if you continue down this path, just like there is no hope if the Israelite people continue on this path. And then God has an interesting warning to Assyria, specifically God's judgment on Assyria. He says, woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger, in whose hand is the club of my wrath. And what he's saying is that Assyria might think they've got it good right now because they are the instrument of my destruction. But he warns the king of Assyria, who has threatened Jerusalem, has said, I am the punishment of God. I am the thing that God has sent to destroy you. He says, the king of Assyria doesn't really follow my commands. He's preyed upon you because I have willed it so, but in his own pride, he is assuring his destruction. He's warning the king of Assyria, who is now claiming that, all these great things I have done myself, like I have destroyed God's people, I've come in, I've taken over all these countries, and aren't I great? And God says, yes, you have accomplished great things because I allowed you to, but he makes sure that the Assyrians and the Israelites know that he's still prideful, and just because I allowed him to do this thing doesn't mean that he is a holy ruler. He says, does the axe raise itself above the person who swings it, or saw boast against the one who uses it? As if a rod were to wield the person who lifts it up, or a club brandish the one who is not the wood. He says, you are my instrument. You do not command me, I command you. And so he wants it to be known that just because he's the one who sent the Assyrian king to conquer the northern kingdom and come against Jerusalem, that doesn't mean that he's now establishing the Assyrian king as his holy leader or anything like that. So that kind of, I had the thought of like, yes, we always talk about how our leaders in today's governments and such are appointed by God because that's part of God's plan? Yes, but just because they are appointed by God doesn't mean that we are to follow them because they are part of God's plan. Sometimes I feel like people try and buy in blindly to leaders just because they have this thought of like, oh, well, if they're a leader, then that means it's part of God's will that they are leading the way that they are. And so it's just something to keep in mind that everyone in this world is an instrument of the Lord. That doesn't always mean that they have the Lord's authority, if you get what I'm saying. Does that make sense? Any thoughts on that? And then he ends it all there with assuring the Israelites, my people who live in Zion, do not be afraid of the Assyrians who beat you with a rod and lift up a club against you. Very soon my anger against you will end and the wrath of my destruction will cease. And so he kind of wraps up all of chapter 10 there with a, yes, these bad things are happening, but the people who are oppressing you will eventually come under my wrath as well, and the time of punishment will end. And so we go into chapter 11, where we continue to talk about the holy seed. If you remember in chapter 9, it's talked about the holy seed that is left in the stump that is Israel, that even though all this wrath has like scorched the land and burned down the forests, that there will be a remnant left, and that the holy seed will be preserved through this stump of Israel. And so here Isaiah continues his description of what that is going to be. So we're in chapter 11. If someone wants to read verses 1 through 5. Verses 1 through 5.
There shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. His delight is in the fear of the Lord, and he shall not judge by the sight of his eyes, nor decide by the hearing of his ears. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall slay the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his loins, and faithfulness the belt of his waist.
All right. So, a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. What is the shoot that comes from the stump of Jesse? The shoot of Jesse is David. And then verse 2, sorry, not verse 2. And then from the shoot of Jesse, from the shoot that comes up from the stump of Jesse, his roots, a branch, will bear fruit. So, it's interesting that we've talked about in previous chapters that it talks about how the Messiah will establish the throne of David and will sit on the throne of David. It's interesting here that we are not describing Christ as a branch from the stem of David. We are talking about how from the shoot of the stump of Jesse grows a branch. I think what Isaiah and the Lord are trying to establish here is that Jesus is of the line of David, that he is a direct descendant. The shoot that comes up is David, who establishes kind of the basis of the Israelite king. We know that David was human. He had his flaws. He sinned as all humans do. But what do we remember David as? Being a man after God's own heart. How he's described as the way that he followed and worshiped the Lord was something that was beyond anyone of his time. And so even though, yes, David sinned and was punished by the Lord and had all these things that happened, David was the ideal Israelite king that the Lord then promised David he would establish his kingdom forever through David. And so we see here that Jesus, the coming Messiah, is a branch off of that kingdom. That the branch that bears fruit comes from the shoot from the stump of Jesse. And then we have some identifiers. And there in verse 2, the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. spirit of wisdom, of understanding, of counsel and might, and of knowledge and fear of the Lord, and he will delight in the fear of the Lord. That in some ways, the people, I guess, could take that as meaning Solomon, how Solomon was wise, how the Lord gave Solomon, like the Lord offered Solomon anything that that Solomon wanted, and Solomon said, "Give me wisdom." And so then the Lord blessed him with other things. But then as we continue down, we see that we're not talking about judgment of one's physical eyes. We see, how does he judge? He will judge not by what he sees with his eyes or decide what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. That the knowledge and the justice that the Messiah brings is not just what can be seen by the eye, not just the proof and the things that are told that you can hear, that the judgment, that the knowledge that the Messiah brings is from God, that it is righteous. And so, with righteousness he will judge the needy, with justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. We just finished talking about woe to those who oppress the needy and make unjust laws for those who are less than blanking on the word again. Privileged. That's what I was thinking of. And so here we see that he will not just judge, the official courtrooms and like the major decisions of the city, that he will bring judgment and grace to even those who are in need, the lowest of the low in the human eye. And then we have almost an oxymoronic description here of how the Messiah will take his approach. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips, he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. We've been talking about throughout these last few chapters that the Messiah will not come as a physical conquering hero. We've talked about how the Messiah is a conqueror of people's hearts. And here we see that continue. He will strike the earth. Very aggressive, very But what will he strike the earth with? His words. What he says. He will slay the wicked. That sounds really aggressive. But what will he slay the wicked with? The breath of his lips. He will not cut down people. He will not run them through with a sword. He will slay the hearts of the wicked with the breath of his lips. He will slay sin. He will slay deceit in people's hearts. Later on in this chapter, we're going to get a description of the Messiah coming and conquering the enemies of Israel. But from what we've been told here, again, it's not a physical conquering. It's not a war that will be fought with swords and axes and physical weapons, that this will be a campaign against sin, against people turning away from God. Because the fruit of all of the Messiah's striking the earth and slaying the wicked with the breath of his lips, it says that righteousness will be his belt and faithfulness the sash around his waist. And so this whole conflict here is not to bring about a physical castle where all people will live under one city. It'll bring peace. And let's read about what kind of peace. If we move on, let's read verses 6 down through 9. Verses 6 through 9.
And the wolf will dwell with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and the little boy will lead them. Also the cow and the bear will graze, their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. The nursing child will play by the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child will put his hand on the viper's den. They will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea.
Thank you. So, not just a lack of war, not just I feel content in my own person. The kind of peace that the Messiah is bringing, the wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. He describes here all these different animals that are going to dwell together. These are apex predators: wolves, leopards, lions, bears, lion again, cobra dens. And all of these things, they are put right there together with lambs, goats, calves, little children, cow and calves, ox, infants, and young children. All of these things will, like it says, will feed together, will graze together. The young child will put its hand into a viper's nest. It'll be so complete that not even animals whose one instinct is to fight or run away. As we know with snakes, that snakes will often not mess with you unless you get up in their business. And here we see the young child will put its hand into a viper's nest, and they will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain. I love Isaiah. He puts so much colorful description into how complete the things that the Messiah will bring here. He doesn't just talk about one specific instance. He talks about a whole group of animals that will be peaceful together. And what we know that the Messiah coming will bring about that peace, but what there at the end of verse 9, why will they not harm nor destroy on all his holy mountain? What is bringing that peace?
Knowledge of the Lord.
The knowledge of the Lord. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. That when the Messiah comes and the peace is given, that all will know of the Lord and his commands and how to live the life that the Lord commands. So we realize that, yes, how we've talked about in the past, that there will always be conflict from being, from following the Lord's word, as will be, but in the end, the ultimate result of preaching the good word, of following the same path that the Messiah has set, is peace. Is that in the end, the knowledge of the Lord will fill the earth as waters cover the sea. That it will be full, and that it will be totally complete. Any other thoughts of this first kind of half of the chapter? Any points that I might have missed? Yeah.
Isn't this basically what the church is in bringing people together? No matter how much we might be enemies or whatever in the culture or in whatever, if you follow the word of God, you're going to be one in Christ. And that brings the nations together. Ultimately, is what he's saying here. All nations, they may be fighting against each other, but we have brethren in every country of the world that we're not at war with. We may be with their government or whatever, but not with the Christians within those countries.
Yeah. The Australian Christians are not trying to get a higher holiness score than the American Christians. There's no inner conflict or inner competition within Christianity. It is something that unites us all, not something that we're supposed to have, our different regional team that we have. Yeah, it is a uniting thing. It's good news. It is the good news. And so, yeah, the purpose of the church is to spread the good news to everyone. that everyone finds joy in the good news. Yeah, good point. All right, and so as we move on into verse 10, we're going to see, a description of, again, how the Messiah will become kind of the standard that people flock to, but also one of the earliest instances of seeing the Lord's plan for the Gentiles. And we'll touch on that when we get there. But first, let's read verses 10, and let's go through, let's read 10 through 12. 10 through 12.
And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, who shall stand as a banner to the people, for the Gentiles shall seek him, and his resting place shall be glorious. It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time, to recover the remnant of his people who are left, from Syria and Egypt, from Pathros and Cush, from Elam and Shinar, from Hamath and the islands of the sea. He will set up a banner for the nations, and will assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth.
Thank you. So, we see that once again that the Lord's people will be brought together, that the nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. In verse 11, there's an interesting wording there. In that day, the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people. What was the first time? The first time the Lord reached out his hand to reclaim a surviving remnant. I think I heard it. Egypt. Yeah, the one that he refers to this second time. The first time is, leading his people out of Egypt, who have been enslaved by the powering nation of the time. That even though they were nothing but laborers and workers, he took Moses, who, escaped the Pharaoh's wrath of killing all of the baby boys, and eventually ended up in Pharaoh's household. One of the strongest cases of irony in the early Bible, at least, is Pharaoh tried so hard to get rid of all the baby boys, but in his own actions, he ended up with Moses as a adopted son. And eventually Moses goes out to the wilderness and comes back and leads the Lord's people out of Egypt. And so that was the first time that the Lord reached out his hand and reclaimed the surviving remnant of the people. So now, the second time to reclaim surviving remnant of his people from Assyria, from Lower Egypt, from Upper Egypt, from Cush, from Elam, from Babylonia, or I think, as Zach's already said, Shinar, which is the Hebrew term, from Hamath, and from the islands of the Mediterranean. He will raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. And he will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four quarters of the earth. And so here we see that, again, the Messiah comes to unite. That in the area that Jesus travels and he teaches, that he gets more and more followers, that he doesn't just stay in one place and let the people come to him and learn from him. He goes to all the different regions around the area. Like we talked about, his first place that he kind of settled and traveled around was Galilee, which we talked about was more of a Gentile area, that it wasn't exactly where the established Jewish population would have been, but it would be more established with Gentile population. But then we see Jesus, he travels around, he sails across the Sea of Galilee, he does teaching everywhere, that his followers come from not just one region, but from everywhere that he goes. And so here, the banner for the peoples, the nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. Jesus goes and brings people to God's word, and the resting place is heaven. He reaches out his hand and he gathers all the people from all of the area, and then he assembles the scattered people of Judah from the four quarters of the earth. if we continue on in the next verses, we see that again, Isaiah, through the Lord loving his visual language, his not even metaphorical, but just making sure that the descriptions are easy to comprehend, that you get a picture of what all is going on. If we continue down verse 13 through, actually, yeah, we're just going to finish up the chapter here, so I'm going to read 13 through the end. Ephraim's jealousy will vanish, and Judah's enemies will be destroyed. Ephraim will not be jealous of Judah, nor Judah hostile towards Ephraim. They will swoop down on the slopes of Philistia to the west. Together they will plunder the people to the east. They will subdue Edom and Moab, and the Ammonites will be subject to them. The Lord will dry up the gulf of the Egyptian sea, and with a scorching wind he will sweep his hand over the Euphrates River. He will break it up into 7 streams so that anyone can cross over in sandals. There will be a highway for the remnant of his people that is left in Syria, as there was for Israel when he came up out of Egypt. And so here I can kind of see how the Israelites would tend to think that the Messiah was coming as a physical king. Because right here, Isaiah uses very aggressive language, as we kind of described earlier. We've just talked about raising a banner, gathering the scattered people. And there in verse 13, Ephraim's jealousy will vanish and Judah's enemies will be destroyed. Isaiah speaks of a time where the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom will not be divided as they were in these times. That the Israelite people will no longer be of 2 different kingdoms, that they will become the one people again. Ephraim will not be jealous of Judah, nor Judah hostile towards Ephraim. And then here in verse 14, we start to get into where if you take this section of the chapter completely out of context, you could totally make a point that, the Messiah's come to tear down our enemies' kingdoms. Like, we're gonna have this great hero who's gonna slay the wicked, literally. Because, if we just read verses 14 through 15, they will swoop down on the slopes of Philistia to the west. Together they will plunder the people to the east. They will subdue Edom and Moab, and the Ammonites will be subject to them. The Lord will dry up the gulf of the Egyptian sea with a scorching wind. He will sweep his hand over the Euphrates River. He will break it up into 7 streams so that anyone can cross over in sandals. So if you just take that section of the verse, it would be,
Isn't he, at this point, isn't he mostly talking about when they come back from captivity, that they'd be coming back and then God would be doing justice to those nations that had taken them away? Although all of them didn't come back, and some of them didn't actually come until Pentecost. But at this point, he kind of goes back and forth, it seems to me, from talking about what's going to happen when they come back to Jerusalem, and also when they would come back and be united in the kingdom of the Lord. So it's kind of a dual promise.
No, definitely. Yeah, it has meaning both further down and at the present, which is not uncommon for when the prophets speak. Because not soon, but after all of this has gone down, eventually the Lord does drive Assyria out, and eventually, the kingdoms that have come to conquer Israel are driven out, that they're laid to waste, and so then the Israelite people begin to spread and fill the land that was allotted to them in the beginning. And so here we see that Isaiah, comparatively, this is a very positive verse, or very positive chapter. In the past chapters, we've gotten good news, but then that usually comes with, but there still will be punishment. He never wants them to forget that they have turned away. But now we see Isaiah is having more of a shift towards, there will come a time where there is hope. With no stinger there at the end, with no but he assures them that the punishment will end. Your punishment is not eternal. That there will come a time again where the Lord's kingdom will be established again, but it'll be different, in a different kind of way, as we've seen him talk about the Messiah. And then in verse 16 at the end there, There will be a highway for the remnant of his people that is left from Assyria, as there was for Israel when they came up out of Egypt. And there we get the direct parallel between the first time the Lord led his people out of exile and the second time. That he is going to make a path for the Israelite people to return back to their kingdom, just as he did. He literally parted the seas so that the Israelites could cross the Red Sea away from the pursuing Egyptians. And just another point that kind of came to mind as I was reading all of this, how the Messiah will bring, both the Messiah will bring the Israelites back together, and how also there will come a time soon that the Israelites will be reunited, is whenever we think of Daniel. How he was a prophet to the Israelites, but Daniel was also in the midst of the Babylonian exile. That they were not in Jerusalem, they were not in their own cities, they were a people who had been moved by the Babylonian kingdom into their own towns. And so Daniel, as we know the story of Daniel in the lion's den, that he is in the midst of the city of Babylon, and the local priests catch him praying to the Lord. And so even in exile, even in being split up and shattered into a different people, there's still those that follow the word of God. And eventually we see that all of those people come back together again. And this prophecy speaks of the bringing back together. So any other thoughts about chapter 11 in general, but also the Messiah being the banner of the people of Israel? All right. And so now we're going to move into chapter 12, which is a very short chapter, probably our shortest chapter so far that we've had. It is only 6 verses long. But Isaiah, I almost kind of feel like getting caught up in the moment of he's just preached about the glorious, bringing back together of his people. Isaiah has lived among people who have been exiled, among people who are being attacked, who are being threatened by an outside kingdom, and has lived among a sinful people. And here he has just finished preaching about how they will be brought back together, how the kingdom will be reunited, how the Messiah will come and bring peace to the world in this time of war. And I feel like Isaiah is so emphatic here in this chapter 12 that he takes an entire chapter just to take a song of praise, as this chapter is titled. In that day you will say, I will praise you, Lord. Although you were angry with me, your anger has turned away and you have comforted me. Surely God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. The Lord himself is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. With joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation. So that first section, Isaiah is reassuring the people, it won't just be me, it won't just be certain individuals, that this is not some good news that I give you now that might happen. Isaiah wants them to know that this is assured, that this is such a glorious thing that is coming, that he says, I will praise you, Lord, although you were angry with me. Your anger has turned away and you have comforted me. He says, all that God has promised will come true. His wrath is against you now, but when the time finally comes for you to be together again, you will praise the Lord because his anger has turned away from you. Surely God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. The whole issue we're having right now is that the Israelites don't trust the Lord's word, that they haven't followed it. They have corrupted it. They've turned away from those practices. Their heart is not in their worship. And in the coming future, they will claim, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. The Lord himself is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. That we wholeheartedly know that God is our salvation. We sing the songs, trust and obey, victory in Jesus, that there is nothing that we have to fear on this earth, whether it was the Israelites against massive armies that come to conquer them, whether it's persecution of Christians today in countries where public worship is punishable by imprisonment or death, that there will come a time with joy that we will draw water from the wells of salvation. The well of salvation that the Lord, we can assume, is the source of. That we draw holiness, that we draw our peace from the Lord himself. That when Jesus came down, he taught, he sacrificed himself, and so now we are the priests, but we are also the benefactors of God's grace. We draw water from the wells of salvation, from the grace and compassion that was God giving his one and only Son, so that whoever believes in him may not perish but have life eternal. And then the very last section of the chapter here, in that day you will also say, give praise to the Lord, proclaim his name, make known among the nations what he has done, and proclaim that his name is exalted. Sing to the Lord, for he has done glorious things. Let this be known to all the world. Shout aloud and sing for joy, people of Zion, for great is the Holy One of Israel among you. Here we see the praise will continue, but what does it say? Make known among the nations what he has done. Proclaim his name, to proclaim that his name is exalted. Sing to the Lord, for he has done glorious things. Let this be known to all the world. Isaiah is talking to the last remnant of the Lord's people, who are God's chosen people. The Israelites established themselves that they are protected by the Lord, that they are God's chosen people. But what are we going to see in the near future? That God's name is going to be known to all the world. Not just the Middle East, not just Israel the country, not just Israel the people, that the Lord's name is going to be known for the whole world. And Jesus completes that with the Great Commission. Go and make disciples of all nations. Don't make disciples of Israelites, don't make disciples of this country, of that country. Go and make disciples of all nations, so that the Lord and all his glorious things will be known to all the world. Shout aloud and sing for joy, people of Zion, for the great is the Holy One of Israel among you. That in the day of Jesus, the people shouted for joy that they had seen the Messiah. And now today, I hope that, maybe not literally running down the streets jumping for joy and shouting, but that in our hearts and our minds, that we can take great happiness and great comfort that through Jesus Christ we are saved. That if we follow the commandments of the Bible, of the Lord, that we will have life eternal. And that we will get to see all of our brothers and sisters, all of our Christian brothers and sisters, our family, that as we are taken up into the air and we see all the great nations that come with us, that will bring us even more joy, as it does the Lord himself. Any other thoughts about that? All right. Well, we're about 4 minutes from getting the timer, so I don't feel like we went too short this morning, but thank you for a good class. It was nice. There was always, like I kind of said, there was always this good news, but there's still punishment. I feel like this was a good palate cleanser for, the Messiah coming in the future, and then how the kingdom will be established. So thank you for a good class. We are dismissed.